Today, we're going to tell you a story that sounds almost like folklore, yet it's rooted in real human kindness, intertwined lives, and a little-known connection between a civil rights legend and Hollywood royalty. When Julia Roberts was born in 1967, her parents didn't have enough money to pay for the hospital delivery. Who stepped in to help? None other than Martin Luther King Jr. and his wife, Coretta Scott King. In a moment of quiet generosity, the King family cleared that bill, not as a publicity stunt, but as a gesture born from a prior act of fellowship and an unlikely bond. In this video, we'll trace how this unexpected connection came to be, what we actually know from reliable sources, and what it tells us about community, race, and the legacy of kindness. Let's dive in. To understand this story, we have to go back to mid-1960s Atlanta, Georgia, a city that was both steeped in the racial tensions of the American South and also one of the epicenters of the civil rights movement. Atlanta in the 1960s was a city of contrasts. On one hand, strong segregation and systemic inequalities. On the other, hubs of Black intellectual life, activism, and institutions that advanced civil rights. Martin Luther King Jr. was a native Georgian. Born and raised in Atlanta, he maintained deep roots in the city. Meanwhile, Julia Roberts' parents, Walter and Betty Lou Roberts, had a passion for theater and arts. They operated a local theater school in Atlanta known as the Actors and Writers Workshop. This school was more than just a hobby or side project. It was, by some accounts, one of the few schools in that region willing to accept Black students during an era when racial lines were rigidly enforced. Coretta Scott King, seeking performing arts opportunities for her children, reached out to Betty Lou Roberts and asked if her kids, the King children, could join that acting school. According to Julia in an interview, the Roberts family said yes. It's worth pausing here. In that era, it wasn't trivial for Black children to be accepted into integrated or predominantly white artistic environments. That the Roberts School welcomed the King's children speaks to both a spirit of inclusion and courage. Gayle King, in that same interview, remarks, "In the 60s, you didn't have little Black children interacting with little white kids in acting school, and your parents were like, 'Come on in.' Thus, a friendship and mutual respect grew between the two families over time. And that relationship, it turns out, would have a surprising consequence." Section 2, The Birth of Julia Roberts and the Hospital Bill. Julia Fiona Roberts was born on October 28, 1967, at Crawford Long Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. At that moment, the Roberts family faced a problem. They couldn't pay the hospital delivery bill. The reasons aren't deeply documented in public sources, but it fits with other accounts that the family had been under financial strain. Here's where the kindness enters. The King family, Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King, paid the bill. Julia Roberts recounted this in a 2022 interview with Gayle King as part of A&E iHistory's History Talks series. She said simply, "The King family paid for my hospital bills." People magazine also reports Roberts saying that her parents couldn't pay for the hospital bill, and the King family did so in return for a kind gesture the Roberts family had made previously. The story, though remarkable, has been covered by credible outlets like CBS News, the Los Angeles Times, and People. One caveat, while most coverage takes Roberts' version as the factual core, historical documentation is limited. There's no publicly available hospital ledger or King family archive that confirms the transaction, at least in the sources I could find. That said, the story has gained traction precisely because Julia Roberts shared it herself, and it coheres with the broader relationships known between the families. It's also poignant that this assistance came not long before a national tragedy. Less than 6 months after Julia's birth on April 4, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Thus, the episode lives partly in memory, partly in testimony, a brief but meaningful intersection between the legacies of two families. Section 3. The relationship deepens. Culture, theater, and civil rights. To understand the depth of the connection, we need to explore how the Roberts School and the King children's involvement played out over time. Walter Roberts, Julia's father, acted as a coach and mentor. Some sources say he served as acting coach to Yolanda King, the eldest daughter of Martin and Coretta. According to Wikipedia, the Roberts School was the only racially integrated theater troupe in the region, and because of its progressive stance and the Roberts' financial limitations, Coretta Scott King, and presumably the King family, stepped in to pay Julia's hospital bill. In the Vanity Fair piece, the relationship is characterized as a friendship rooted in shared values, the King's children being welcomed into Roberts' school, and on a lean day, the Kings helping the Roberts family out of a jam. An additional voice comes from the civil rights era community. Donzale Abernathy, daughter of Ralph Abernathy, close colleague of MLK, has described childhood interactions among the King children, the Abernathy children, and Walter Roberts. She recalls performances where young Yolanda King and other children would act, sometimes with Mr. Walter Roberts directing or teaching. These recollections help reinforce the notion that this was not a passing acquaintance, but a sustained intersection of lives via art, activism, and community. One moment that is frequently cited. Yolanda King starred in a play produced by the Actors and Writers Workshop, the Roberts School, in which she kissed a white actor. That production reportedly led to intense backlash. A member of the KKK even blew up a car outside the theater as a threat. This anecdote underscores how socially daring and courageous the Roberts Theater environment was, and how delicate the balance was in that social climate. To allow integrated casting and play interracial scenes in a Southern theater in those years was to court controversy. All of this implies that the connection between the Roberts and King families was not superficial, but born of mutual respect, shared ideals, and real risk. Section 4. The meaning and implications of the story. Now, why does this story matter? What can we draw from it, beyond the wow of a surprising detail? Humanizing historical figures. Civil rights icons like MLK often feel enshrined, distant. This anecdote brings him closer, not as a mythic hero, but as a person capable of generosity, gratitude, and small acts of kindness in day-to-day life. Reciprocity and community. The gesture from the Kings was not random. It was rooted in an earlier act of inclusion by the Roberts family. The Roberts family welcomed the King children into their school. Years later, when the Roberts faced a crisis, the Kings reciprocated. That cycle of giving and receiving creates sustainable bonds across lines of race, class, and fame. Art as a meeting place. At its heart, this story is about a theatrical school in Atlanta, about art crossing racial lines, children playing roles, and relationships forming around creative spaces. It's a reminder that culture and art can be sites of resistance and sites of connection. Legacy and memory. The act of paying a hospital bill is small in historical scale, but the story echoes through decades because of who Julia Roberts would become and how we interpret the gesture now. It invites us to preserve stories of quiet generosity, not just loud protests or famous speeches. Limits and uncertainties. It's also important to note the limits of what we know. The story relies heavily on Roberts' own account, and while many published news outlets have repeated it, there's no known archival document I found confirming it outright. Hospital ledger, King family letter, etc. One should hold a healthy awareness that oral history, memory, and testimony carry weight, but also sometimes gaps. In short, it's a story that sits at the intersection of civil rights, celebrity, and storytelling. One that gives us a window into how personal connections ripple out into larger histories. Section 5. Julia Roberts' life in light of this origin. Knowing this origin story adds a new dimension when we look at Julia Roberts' life and career. Let's briefly reflect on that. Julia Roberts would grow into one of Hollywood's most iconic actresses, earning an Academy Award, multiple Golden Globes, box office success, and becoming known as America's sweetheart. Her upbringing in Atlanta, her family's engagement in theater, and the moral seed of that early kindness may have contributed to her values and public voice. In her public life, Roberts has participated in humanitarian work, e.g., UNICEF involvement, and expressed empathy and social awareness in interviews. In the 2022 interview, she didn't treat the hospital bill revelation as a sensational reveal. Rather, she described it plainly, almost matter-of-factly. "They helped us out of a jam." For many fans, this anecdote makes the star more human, a reminder that behind big names are families, histories, networks of support, and stories we don't always see. Furthermore, the story links two legacies: the civil rights movement and the golden age of Hollywood. It invites a broader reflection on how history and culture are stitched together in unexpected ways. Stories like these renew our faith in human kindness and remind us that behind every public figure are quiet networks of support, sacrifice, and community. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King have long been celebrated for their public leadership and moral courage. But this gesture, paying a birth hospital bill for someone they didn't yet know, reminds us that compassion often lives in small acts. Julia Roberts, in turn, carries that legacy, born into a moment of love and reciprocity, growing into a voice in culture. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss our next deep dive into history's hidden stories. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. What other surprising connections between civil rights and culture should we explore together? Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.